The road looked ordinary at first glance. A narrow strip of worn pavement stretching through farmland, bordered by low grass and scattered trees. In quieter times, it had been a route used by tractors, delivery trucks, and villagers traveling between nearby towns. But on that day, the road carried a different purpose. It had become one of the main paths allowing Ukrainian soldiers to move forward along the front line. Vehicles passed along it carefully. Supply trucks, armored carriers, small convoys moving in staggered intervals. Each vehicle depended on that road remaining open, because once a road like that becomes blocked, the entire rhythm of a military position begins to change, and the danger on that particular morning was hidden beneath the pavement. Somewhere along the road ahead, explosive devices had been placed, not visible from a distance, not obvious to the drivers approaching in their vehicles, but enough to halt movement if they were not discovered in time. This is where the Ukrainian combat engineer stepped forward. Combat engineers carry a responsibility that often remains unseen. Their work does not always happen in the center of a battlefield exchange. Instead, it happens in the quiet spaces between movements, on roads, under bridges, across fields where vehicles must pass. The engineer assigned to this stretch of road understood that the route ahead had to be cleared before the next convoy could move safely. Behind him, Ukrainian vehicles were waiting, engines idling, drivers watching the road ahead. The farmland around the position was quiet, though not peaceful. Far in the distance, faint artillery echoes rolled across the horizon. Smoke from earlier impacts still hung lightly over one of the tree lines. But here on the road itself, there was only the sound of wind brushing through dry grass and the soft metallic click of equipment being prepared. The Ukrainian combat engineer walked forward slowly. His protective gear was heavy, layered carefully to guard against possible explosions. The visor over his helmet reflected the gray sky above the road. In one hand, he carried the detection equipment used to scan the ground. In the other, he steadied himself as he moved step by step along the pavement. Clearing a road like this is not fast work. Every movement must be deliberate. Every section of ground must be checked, because even a small device placed beneath a layer of dirt or debris can stop an entire convoy in an instant. Behind the engineer, the waiting vehicles remained still. Drivers leaned forward inside their seats, watching his slow progress along the road. No one urged him to hurry. No one called out instructions. Everyone understood the pace required for work like this. The Ukrainian engineer reached the first section of pavement where suspicious markings had been reported earlier. Small disturbances in the dirt along the edge of the road. Nothing dramatic, just slight irregularities where the ground had been touched. He knelt carefully beside the spot. The scanning device passed slowly over the surface. The wind moved again across the farmland, carrying a faint scent of burned soil from distant artillery strikes. For a few moments, the road remained silent. Then the device signaled. A soft electronic tone. The engineer paused. He shifted his position slightly, brushing a thin layer of dust away from the ground with a careful motion. Beneath it, a partially buried device revealed itself. The convoy waiting behind the engineer could not see the details from their distance, but they saw the moment when he stopped moving. They saw him kneel, and they understood what that meant. One of the soldiers inside a waiting vehicle spoke quietly to the driver beside him. The road depends on him now. The engineer remained focused on the device beneath the dirt. His gloves moved slowly, uncovering the edges with patient precision. Nothing rushed, no sudden movement, because rushing in moments like this can change everything. The work of a combat engineer requires a particular kind of calm, the kind that holds steady even when the ground beneath your hands might be dangerous. And on that narrow road through farmland, that calm became the only thing keeping the convoy behind him moving forward. The engineer continued clearing the device, exposing the wires and mechanism hidden beneath the soil. The waiting vehicles remained exactly where they were, engines humming quietly, dust resting along their tires. The Ukrainian soldiers inside them knew that if the road was not cleared properly, the advance beyond that point would stop. But if the engineer succeeded, the entire line of vehicles behind him would move again. After several careful minutes, the device was neutralized. The engineer lifted it slowly from the ground and placed it beside the road. Then he stood, not with celebration, just with quiet confirmation that the path ahead could continue to be examined. He looked down the road again toward the next section of pavement that still needed to be checked. The convoy behind him remained waiting, and the farmland remained quiet. But one explosive device had already been removed from the road, and the work of clearing the path forward had begun. Before continuing, the engineer glanced briefly toward the vehicles behind him. One soldier standing near the lead vehicle raised a hand in acknowledgement. The engineer nodded once. Then he turned back toward the road, and the careful search continued. Step by step, he said quietly to himself, we keep the way open. The road stretched ahead through the fields, and the engineer continued walking forward along it. The road continued through the farmland like a narrow gray line. From a distance, it appeared unchanged, just pavement cutting through quiet fields beneath a pale sky. But along that road, every meter now carried a question. The Ukrainian combat engineer moved forward slowly, scanning the ground with the handheld detector. The device passed over the pavement in careful arcs, hovering just above the surface. Behind him, the convoy remained still. Engines continued to idle quietly. A light vibration from the vehicles traveled through the road and into the soil beneath the engineer's boots. Yet no one moved forward. Everyone understood that until the road was safe, the convoy would not advance. You know, in moments like this, the pace of an entire operation slows to match the pace of a single person walking ahead. The engineer's progress determined everything. He advanced several more steps, stopping occasionally to examine cracks in the pavement or disturbed patches of dirt along the shoulder. Wind brushed through the dry grass lining the roadside. Far away, a faint artillery echo rolled across the fields again, low and distant. But along the road itself, there was only the steady rhythm of careful work. Scan, pause, step forward, scan again. The convoy watched him from a distance. Some soldiers remained seated inside the vehicles, their helmets tilted slightly toward the windshield as they followed the engineer's movements. Others stood beside the trucks, resting their hands along the metal doors while keeping their eyes fixed on the road ahead. Time stretched quietly. The engineer reached another section where the road curved slightly around a stand of trees. This bend had been identified earlier as a possible location where additional devices might have been placed. He slowed even more. The scanning device passed slowly across the pavement, then along the dirt shoulder beside the road. For several seconds, there was no signal, just the soft hum of the equipment and the rustling of grass in the wind. Then the tone sounded again, a brief electronic alert. The engineer stopped immediately. He crouched near the edge of the road, brushing aside loose gravel with the careful movements of his gloves. Another buried device revealed itself beneath the thin layer of soil. From the convoy's position behind him, the soldiers saw him kneel again. No one needed an explanation. One of the drivers inside the lead truck leaned forward slightly, resting his arms on the steering wheel. He watched the engineer work beside the road, and quietly, almost to himself, he said, "He's still clearing the way." The engineer remained focused. His movements stayed controlled, deliberate. The device beneath the soil appeared more complex than the first one. Additional wiring ran beneath the dirt toward the roadside vegetation. The engineer paused briefly, examining the arrangement before continuing. Work like this requires patience. Each wire, each component, every small part must be handled with care. The farmland remained quiet around him. Only the wind moved through the nearby trees. Occasionally, a distant rumble from the horizon reminded everyone that the larger battle continued somewhere beyond the fields. But here on the road, everything depended on the engineer's hands. He began the process of exposing the device completely. The soil was brushed away piece by piece. A small metal housing appeared beneath the dirt. The wires connected to it stretched slightly deeper into the roadside ground. The engineer adjusted his position, lowering himself closer to the pavement to reach the final connections. Behind him, the convoy did not move. The soldiers waiting beside the vehicles remained silent. Even the engine noise seemed quieter now. Minutes passed slowly. Then the engineer carefully separated the final connection. The device was neutralized. He lifted the small metal housing from the ground and carried it a few steps away from the road, placing it beside the first device he had already removed. Two explosive devices now rested safely off the pavement. The road ahead remained partially unexplored, but the immediate section behind him had been cleared. The engineer stood slowly, brushing dirt from his gloves. He looked down the road again. The stretch ahead disappeared briefly behind a line of trees before continuing deeper into the farmland. There could still be more devices hidden along that path. The work was not finished, but the convoy behind him had already gained something important. The first part of the road had been made safe. One of the Ukrainian soldiers waiting near the lead vehicle stepped slightly forward onto the pavement. He did not approach the engineer. He simply stood there, watching the cleared stretch of road between them. Then he spoke quietly, his voice carrying across the short distance. "Still moving forward." The engineer nodded once, not in celebration, just acknowledgement. Then he turned back toward the road ahead. The scanning device returned to its slow sweep over the pavement. Step by step, the careful movement continued. The farmland stretched out on both sides of the road, calm beneath the gray sky, but along that narrow strip of pavement, every meter still required attention. The engineer walked forward again. Each step placed carefully, each section of ground examined before moving on. Behind him, the convoy remained ready, waiting for the moment when the final section of road would be cleared, and when that moment arrived, the vehicles would begin moving again. But until then, the engineer continued alone on the pavement, quietly opening the road, meter by meter. And as he moved forward, he said one more sentence softly beneath his breath. The road must stay open. The road stretched farther into the farmland, disappearing briefly behind a line of thin trees before reappearing again on the other side of the field. By now, the afternoon light had begun to soften. The gray sky above the road carried the quiet weight of a long day along the front line. The Ukrainian combat engineer continued forward, his scanning device moving slowly over the pavement. Step, pause, scan. Each movement carried the same careful rhythm that had guided him since the first device was discovered. Behind him, the cleared section of road now extended several dozen meters back toward the waiting convoy. Two explosive devices had already been removed and placed safely away from the pavement. They rested beside the grass near the roadside ditch. The soldiers near the convoy kept their eyes on the engineer. No one rushed forward. No one started their engines for movement, because everyone understood that the final confirmation of safety had not yet arrived. You know, roads like this become more than just pavement during moments of war. They become lifelines, paths that allow soldiers to reach new positions, routes that carry supplies where they are needed, connections between units spread across wide stretches of land. If a road closes, even briefly, the flow of everything behind it begins to slow. And on this narrow stretch of Ukrainian farmland, that road still depended on the quiet work of one combat engineer. He approached the curve in the road where the trees formed a loose barrier between one field and the next. The shadows beneath the branches made the pavement slightly darker here. It was a place where devices could easily be hidden beneath leaves or dirt carried onto the road by wind. The engineer slowed even further. His scanning device hovered close to the surface, sweeping across every section of ground with patient precision. The farmland around him remained still. Wind brushed gently through the leaves above the roadside ditch. The distant rumble of artillery had faded for the moment. Only the quiet hum of the detection equipment followed the engineer as he moved forward. Several more meters passed without any signal. The scanning device remained silent. The engineer paused once more, checking the shoulder of the road where loose soil had gathered. Nothing. The pavement remained clear. He advanced again. Behind him, one of the soldiers near the lead vehicle watched closely as the engineer passed the curve. The cleared stretch of road was growing longer. For the convoy waiting behind him, that growing distance meant something important. The path forward was opening. Another few steps, another careful scan, still no signal. The engineer straightened slightly, adjusting the strap of his equipment before continuing. The farmland opened up again beyond the trees. The road ahead stretched straight across the field toward a distant ridge. From this vantage point, the next several dozen meters of pavement were clearly visible. He scanned the ground again. Nothing. Then again. Still nothing. The device remained quiet. After a final, slow sweep across the surface of the road, the engineer lowered the scanner. He looked back along the pavement he had just cleared. From the convoy's position, the soldiers could see him standing upright now. For the first time since he began walking down the road, he was no longer crouched or scanning the ground. One of the soldiers beside the lead truck stepped forward onto the pavement again. He waited, watching. The engineer raised one hand and signaled calmly toward the convoy. The road ahead was clear. Engines started almost immediately. The low rumble of the vehicles grew louder as drivers prepared to move forward. Dust lifted gently behind the tires as the first truck rolled slowly down the cleared stretch of pavement. The soldiers remained cautious as they advanced. Each vehicle followed the same line the engineer had walked, carefully, deliberately. Passing the spots where the two explosive devices had been removed from the roadside, the Ukrainian combat engineer stepped aside, standing near the edge of the pavement as the convoy approached. One truck passed him first, then another behind it. The drivers glanced briefly toward him as they moved by. One of them slowed just enough to speak through the open window. His voice carried over the steady engine noise. "Road's open!" The engineer nodded once. His visor reflected the passing vehicles as they continued forward along the road he had cleared. Truck after truck moved past him, each one heading deeper into the farmland where Ukrainian positions waited farther ahead. The convoy did not stop. It continued forward along the path that had just been secured. The engineer remained beside the road as the final vehicle passed. Dust drifted lightly through the air behind the convoy as it disappeared toward the distant ridge. The farmland returned to quiet again. The road now empty except for the tire tracks left behind by the passing vehicles. The engineer looked down the pavement once more. The stretch of road that had held hidden danger earlier in the day now carried only the fading sound of engines moving away. He removed his scanning device from the pavement and rested it against his side. For a moment he stood still beside the road, watching the last vehicle vanish into the distance. Then he spoke quietly, almost to the wind moving across the field. They made it through. The road remained open. The convoy continued moving forward, and the Ukrainian combat engineer turned slowly to begin walking back along the pavement he had cleared.